There are silent gestures that shout what words hesitate to say. Amid the uncertainties of relationships and the difficulty many men have in expressing their feelings aloud, there exists a more powerful language, the language of behavior. When he doesn't say, "I love you," but acts in a certain way, something much deeper is at play. It is precisely in this nearly invisible yet highly symbolic movement that we can recognize true love. This gesture, which may seem simple, carries within it centuries of emotional repression, unconscious projections, and the inner struggle between the desire for connection and the fear of vulnerability. If you've ever wondered whether he truly feels something real, the answer may lie in the action he repeats without realizing it. Leave a comment below saying, "I see beyond words and recognize love in gestures." For when someone shows love without using words, they are revealing something deeply rooted in the unconscious. According to Jung, much of what we feel and experience in our relationships is influenced by contents that are not fully accessible to consciousness. A man who struggles to verbalize his feelings may be under the influence of archetypes, such as the stoic warrior or the distant father, both products of the collective unconscious. Yet even when words fail, the psyche finds ways to manifest itself, and one of the most genuine forms is through actions. That gesture revealing love is directly tied to the process of individuation, in which the individual begins to integrate repressed aspects of his personality. Unconsciously, he may be projecting onto his partner his own desire to allow himself to feel, to love openly, but is still in conflict with his shadow, the part of himself that fears showing vulnerability. When this man acts protectively, attentively, or sacrifices himself silently, he is letting his anima, his inner feminine archetype, shine through. When integrated, the anima fosters empathy, caring, and loving surrender. The difficulty in saying "I love you" verbally can actually reflect an unconscious effort to balance reason and emotion, the masculine and the feminine within himself. It is in this context that love reveals itself, not as a speech, but as an inner movement that overflows into deeds. The language of the unconscious, rich in symbols and behaviors, discloses more authentically what consciousness is not yet capable of fully admitting. For centuries, masculinity was built upon pillars of strength, rationality, and emotional mastery. Within that logic, showing feelings was seen as weakness, something incompatible with the role expected of men in society. Jung understood that individual behaviors are profoundly shaped by the collective unconscious, a universal psychic reservoir of inherited images and patterns. It was on this deep plane that the figure of the emotionally reserved man consolidated as a dominant archetype, especially in the West. He learned to silence what he feels and to express himself only through what is socially acceptable: work, protection, physical presence. This silence is not merely learned, it is passed down from generation to generation, infiltrating the deepest layers of the male psyche. When Jung speaks of the shadow, he refers to all the aspects of ourselves that have been repressed, denied, or excluded from consciousness. In men, that shadow often contains their very capacity to feel, to be vulnerable, to give themselves over to another with authenticity. That is why many men, even when they love deeply, find it enormously difficult to put that feeling into words. They were not taught to name what they feel, they were taught to be silent. The pain of this emotional repression is often lived in silence, and paradoxically, it is precisely in that silence that love begins to manifest most powerfully. When the psyche is prevented from expressing itself in words, it finds other forms of communication. That is why everyday gestures, listening attentively, noticing small details, simply being present even without speaking much, become the vehicles through which affection is revealed. In this context, love does not shout. It whispers through actions. This emotional reserve is also linked to many men's difficulty in accessing their anima, their inner feminine archetype. The anima represents feeling, intuition, empathy, and receptivity. When a man is disconnected from this part of himself, he becomes emotionally rigid. However, when he falls in love or forms a significant relationship, his anima begins to activate. He starts to feel more intensely, even if he doesn't know how to express it. And it is at this moment that his inner conflict intensifies, between the need to maintain self-control and the desire to open himself to feeling. Thus, silence is more than the absence of words. It is a symbolic field where the masculine unconscious tries to reorganize itself. When a man begins to act more thoughtfully, more committedly, or more present, even without declaring love verbally, he is often in the process of individuation. He is attempting to integrate his shadow and access his anima. This does not happen quickly or linearly, and it may be accompanied by resistance, insecurity, or even temporary withdrawal. But deep down, a real transformation is underway. This emotional silence is often misread by those involved with such a man. It may seem coldness or disinterest, when in fact it reflects an ancient block, rooted in generations of men who were never allowed to love with words. The key to understanding this silence is to observe what emerges beyond it: consistent acts, lingering looks, steadfast presence, and selfless giving. Understanding this process in light of Jungian psychology allows us to view relationships with greater depth and compassion. It helps us see that love can indeed exist in silence, but a silence full of meaning, where the masculine soul seeks to find its voice through gestures. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, symbolic language is fundamental to understanding the psyche's manifestations. Everything not directly expressed by consciousness tends to emerge in symbols, dreams, impulses, or attitudes. Love, especially when repressed or not consciously recognized, also manifests in this way. Often it does not appear as a clear verbal declaration, but as a repeated behavior, a gesture that stands out, an attitude that silently speaks what the ego cannot yet admit. This is the symbolic language of affection, the act that, even without words, carries the essence of a profound feeling. When a man doesn't say, "I love you," but shows care in his partner's daily routine, when he makes room for her presence in his world, or when he strives to be emotionally available, even if he cannot name what he feels, he is communicating from the unconscious. These attitudes are symbolic ways of saying, "I love you," though camouflaged in a language that bypasses reason and appeals to lived experience. This is where analytical psychology helps us see beyond the surface. Behind every seemingly simple gesture, there may lie a dense internal story, a transformative movement, an attempt to integrate what has been rejected or repressed. Jung said that the psyche strives for balance and wholeness. This drive toward wholeness, individuation, leads the individual to integrate aspects of himself that have been hidden or devalued. In the case of a man who shows love through deeds rather than words, we can see this quest in motion. He has not yet fully integrated his anima, his sensitive and expressive side, but it is beginning to emerge through behavior. Love then becomes a practice rather than a discourse, presence rather than promise. These symbolic actions vary greatly from person to person, but share an essential characteristic: constancy. Words can be spoken impulsively or without commitment. Attitudes, when consistent, indicate a genuine inner movement. A man who is willing to be there in difficult moments, who shows real concern for another's well-being, who cares without expecting anything in return, is leaving behind symbolic traces of his affection. He may not be able to say, "I love you," but that love is already flowing in his conduct. The key to interpreting this language is attention to symbols. Jung asserted that symbols should not be taken literally, but understood for their emotional and archetypal value. A gesture, like offering help in silence, may carry the caregiver archetype. An act of protection may evoke the warrior, and emotional steadiness may express the anima awakening in a man. Each action is thus a sign revealing how the psyche is moving and which unconscious contents are emerging. Symbolic language also challenges modern impatience. In a world of instant gratification, we expect quick, direct declarations. Yet the psychic process is slow, deep, and often silent. To love in silence, in this sense, is not a mission, but an emotional maturation phase. It is the unconscious finding ways to express what has not yet found words, and perhaps never will, but that does not diminish the authenticity of the feeling. Understanding this symbolic language of love is also an exercise in empathy and deep listening. It demands sensitivity to perceive what lies beyond words and to value small daily rituals as expressions of something greater. We must abandon the insistence on verbal proof and learn to recognize the symbols of affection that emerge between the lines of coexistence. To love is often a symbolic process, and when it expresses itself through actions, silent, constant, and genuine, we witness a form of love that emerges from the unconscious and seeks acknowledgement through presence, not demand. Because, as Jung reminds us, what is not brought to consciousness manifests as destiny, and love, when not recognized in words, finds its path of revelation through deeds. When a man feels love but cannot express it verbally, he may be undergoing a profound, unconscious confrontation with unintegrated aspects of his psyche. Jung offers three key concepts to understand this phenomenon: projection, shadow, and anima. Together, they form the foundation of a rich, symbolic explanation for the difficulty of verbalizing love, even when it is authentic and present. Projection is the first mechanism at play. According to Jung, we project onto others aspects of our psyche that we have not yet recognized or accepted within ourselves. In men, it is common to project repressed emotional qualities, sensitivity, intuition, tenderness onto their partners. The woman becomes a mirror of what he needs to integrate, but cannot yet acknowledge as part of his own identity. He loves her not only for who she is, but also for what she represents symbolically, a gateway to his own inner world. This projection, however, is ambiguous. While it brings them closer, it also creates a chasm. He feels but does not fully understand what he feels, because he is in contact with contents that remain strange to his consciousness. Thus, verbalizing love becomes a challenge, because it would entail admitting and incorporating these qualities he has projected onto another. Until that integration occurs, love is felt powerfully, but also confusingly, as something greater than he can explain. At this point, the shadow enters. The shadow comprises everything the ego rejects or refuses to admit as part of itself. For many men, emotional expression, vulnerability, and the desire for deep affection are thrown into the shadow. They were taught to suppress what they feel in order to preserve an image of strength, self-control, and independence. When love arises, it activates these shadow parts, forcing the man into internal conflict. He wants to surrender, but fears losing control. He desires to express himself, but feels shame or guilt. This tension paralyzes him, and that is when love begins to manifest through actions as an unconscious way to resolve the dilemma. Meanwhile, the anima, the feminine archetype within, tries to surface. The anima serves as a bridge between the unconscious and consciousness in men, and its presence intensifies in significant relationships. When a man falls in love, his anima is activated. He begins accessing emotions, sensations, and intuitions that were previously dormant. But this awakening is not always smooth. If he has not encountered these aspects sufficiently during his development, the anima may appear idealized, uncontrolled, or confused. He feels it, but doesn't know what to do with it. Thus, love becomes an internal battlefield where his rational side seeks control, while his unconscious demands surrender. This conflict between the desire to love and the fear of revealing one's humanity leads him to seek unconscious alternatives for expression. He cares, protects, and shows up, all without saying a word. Action becomes his mode of love because the word remains trapped within layers of the psyche he has yet to traverse. By acting, he attempts to reconcile his shadow and anima, even if he is unaware of it. It is important to understand that this man is not being disingenuous or playing emotional games. He is genuinely grappling with deep psychic contents long neglected. His inability to say "I love you" does not mean absence of love, but a stage in the individuation process. He is learning to integrate parts of himself that were unconscious, and that requires time, confrontation, and often silence. Viewing this process through Jungian concepts allows us to look upon him with less judgment and more empathy. When we see there is a psychic journey underway, we realize that a gesture is often more truthful than a word, because in that gesture are condensed all the symbols of love, all unconscious attempts to be heard. And when the anima begins to express itself, even in silence, it is a sign that the heart is speaking, in a language that must be read more deeply. In a world where words are constantly exalted, identifying love through gestures can seem challenging. Yet for Jungian psychology, it is precisely in the non-verbal language that psychic truth often reveals itself. When a man does not declare love with words, but adopts a specific repetitive attitude, showing care, presence, and selflessness, we face a living symbol, an expression of the unconscious, carrying the weight of a real feeling. This seemingly simple gesture is laden with profound meaning and marks a turning point in the individuation process, the human journey toward integrating all aspects of oneself. True love, when it cannot yet be spoken, almost always manifests in acts of protection. It is neither control nor domination, but a genuine impulse to safeguard the other's security and well-being. It might be as simple as worrying about her health, adjusting small details in the environment for her comfort, or just standing by her when everyone else walks away. This gesture is made without fanfare, without expectation, and often without the man himself noticing that he is revealing his deepest feelings. He acts because he feels, not because he wants to impress. For Jung, this kind of behavior symbolizes unconscious contents trying to emerge. When a man consistently and spontaneously performs such a gesture, he is being guided by something beyond the ego, his anima seeking passage, his shadow being confronted, his persona being questioned. He moves toward the other because something within him is transforming, and that transformation is, in itself, a declaration of love. Recognizing this gesture requires sensitivity and presence. It demands looking beyond the surface to perceive patterns. The man who truly loves in silence tends to repeat this gesture with consistency. He may not speak of his feelings, but his behavior is coherent, committed, and full of intention. What changes is not just what he does, but how he does it. There is an energetic surrender, an emotional willingness that transcends convenience or habit. Moreover, this gesture almost always brings vulnerability. The man who begins to show love through actions also gradually lowers his defenses. He may not say, "I love you," but he will allow his partner into more intimate spaces of his life. This might include discussing personal issues, asking for advice, accepting help, showing frailties. All these are signs that he is trusting, and for Jung, trust is one of the clearest manifestations of emotional integration. The gesture revealing true love, then, is a bridge between the unconscious and the real world. It arises from the man's attempt to connect authentically with what he feels, even if he cannot name it. It is a symbol, a psychic code, communicating what speech has not yet reached. And when we recognize this gesture, we not only see love, but also the inner movement it represents, the soul's awakening, the beginning of communion, the opening to a new way of being. To love without speaking, but to demonstrate with constancy, care, and presence, is a profound form of effective revelation. Throughout this script, we have delved into the silent paths of masculine love, understanding that a gesture revealing a feeling can be more truthful than 1,000 words. Through Jungian analytical psychology, we see that emotional silence carries potent symbols, born of historical repression, yet pointing to a desire for transformation. A man who acts with love, even without verbalizing it, is in the process of individuation, seeking to integrate his shadow, access his anima, and ultimately express his self with authenticity. That gesture is not an isolated act, but the reflection of a powerful inner movement, a symbolic surrender that deserves recognition and acceptance. Learning to perceive this love demands sensitivity, maturity, and an understanding of the deepest psychic processes. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to continue exploring reflections that bridge psychology and human relationships. And don't leave without watching the video appearing on your screen now. It could be the next step on your journey of self-knowledge and transformation.